think more than ever, leaders need to have a DNA of a scientist. And then they need to have the expertise of a technologist. And then they need to have the mindset of a people leader to be able to marry these things together and actually advance in this space.
Where do I stop and where does the AI start?
Experimentation, I think what I've seen is people use it as a badge to go do something. It's my VIP badge to get into the club and do my thing at the generative AI club. When actually experimentation is about saying, let me get curious real quick around what is this opportunity space? What is my hypothesis?
We're all learning this at the same time. No one actually knows what this thing even is. We don't know what it will look like 6 months from today.
I think the lesson here is that always be curious. ABC.
Welcome to the new Lead with AI podcast. In this series, we speak to senior leaders responsible for rolling out AI in their organizations and uncover deeply valuable insights into what success looks like. In today's episode, we meet AJ Thomas, who previously led HR and talent acquisition at X, the Moonshot Factory, a sister company of Google. She's now a fractional CHRO, coach, investor, and in this episode, she shares why we need to see AI as a colleague, a coworker, and not technology, what the human in the loop is and why it's crucial to working with AI, why understanding the history of AI, especially in the context of your organization, is a must to ensure that you don't just create problems faster, the importance of disciplined experimentation and how to create a design of experiment for your next AI project, and finally, why curiosity is the ultimate superpower for humans in the age of AI. So let's dive in. Great. AJ, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Definitely. I'm so excited about the conversation today because I know that you just wrapped up a long role at X, the Moonshot Factory under Alphabet, that you're with a team right now as a fractional executive, and you're in the process of setting up your own fund, and you're doing that alongside writing books and making music and a lot more. So today, out of all those things, we're going to be talking about AI, which I know you know quite a bit about. And maybe just to kick off maybe a broad question, but how do you see, all of your background in talent experience and thinking about people in organizations and AI itself? I think a lot of people are wondering very practically, like, how do I get started with AI? What's your perspective on where the space stands right now?
Yeah, I think for me, a perspective I have, I'm not an expert of this AI space, right? But I do know enough about it to be able to say that what I'm bringing to the table, I think, it is the perspective of that human in the loop that is so important in the age of artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence. There's no, I think, output without a really good input. And I think, again, that piece of keeping humans in the loop, the work that I've done in the people and talent space really connects all of those pieces together because we understand some of the concepts and frameworks that I think define a shared language of how we might adopt this type of technology in our workforces, in our teams, and personally and individually as well.
I've actually been hearing that term quite a lot, human in the loop. Can you maybe just share with the audience, what should they be thinking about when they hear human in the loop?
Yeah, human in the loop. So it's never just about automation. It's not something that you just set and forget, right? And so, especially when it comes to new technologies, it requires a deep amount of curiosity. It requires a deep amount of making sure you have enough perspectives to make an informed decision around how you interact with it. Basic principles of interaction in any sense. And so I think this human in the loop that you're hearing about and that we're all, I think, talking about is really about reminding us that this is not just something where we're going to input a lot. It's coin operated. Okay, it's going to do its thing. We're going to go into Chat GPT, for example, ask a really amazing prompt, take that thing, and then ship it. We always have to be in the loop of that, reviewing it, looking at it, having a discerning eye around what it actually is that it's come out with, right? So that we can validate that that is the right of generative interaction that we have. And it can then create more capacity for us to actually think about things even further, treating it really more as a perspective that can help inform us as humans. I think that's the piece that we need to be thinking about when we think about humans.
So you're already talking about people looking at it very differently than a traditional piece of software, right? We're talking about having good judgment and knowing what kind of input you need to give for what kind of output. So what are some operating principles you would think about when it comes to, releasing AI into your company? Because I'm sure your team was very AI'd, but there's a lot of people still trying to figure it out. So what have you learned in how you embraced AI with your team that other people could pick up?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. I think over the many iterations of teams that I've been in, and I hope you don't mind, I go into a little bit of a history lesson from the learning,
Please
right?
do.
It's interesting that we are in the fifth industrial revolution, right? If you think about steam power being the first revolution, electricity, right? Electronics and hardware, and then AI, robotics, and big data. And now really about this generative piece of how do you actually interact through remote access and all of these different pieces. If you even break that down, when we think about AI, right, as leaders, I think it's really important to understand the history and context of where it's come from. In the fourth and fifth industrial revolution alone, you see the transitions of them building upon each other, where it's really a journey of the zeros and ones, and zeros and ones being data. Again, this is my understanding from a lot of learning and but there's zeros and ones. And then those zeros and ones eventually became that's big data. A lot of data. What do we do with that data? It was huge in the corporate space. It was huge from a security perspective to figure out what that was. Once you had that big data, you had analytics and insights. Okay, now that we have all of this information, we have to then make sense of it. We have to help drive decisions out of it. And a lot of your, SaaS companies came out of that. Enterprise SaaS companies came in and started, hey, we can organize this for you. Here's a platform. Here's what it looks like. The next iteration of that then became machine learning, right? So from the analytics and insights, we figured out, wow, now the data, we need to figure out how it can organize itself so that we can even get faster in the decision making or whatever it is that we're pushing forward with what we're learning. From the machine learning, then came, the natural language processing work that then inevitably turned into now opening the floodgates of us not only interacting with the computer interacting with itself and the data, but actual individuals and humans interacting with the computer itself. And that is the advent of then the generative AI space. And so I think, again, I kind of look at that chain and I say, okay, how many of us as leaders understand the evolution of that enough that we can say, where are we in our experimentation? How mature are our systems? Are our policies? Where are we in that, right? Because you can apply a generative AI solution, but if your company operating system is still just in analytics and insights, you actually haven't set up the fundamentals to be able to experiment, and therefore you may be generating problems faster than actually trying to fix and create opportunities for massive adoption of the technology as you would want to imagine and use it for impact.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective, that if we don't understand where we are in our journey, and we just put generative AI on something, it's actually not going to help us. It could actually hurt us, right? You're saying you could actually create problems even faster. You do hear a lot of people, though, say that this is just the time for people to experiment, just give them the tools, they will figure out the use cases, right? We saw that in a couple of the case studies. So where is that balance between, we've seen some data that employees are actually running faster than companies, right? So the whole BYO AI movement, people are bringing their own ChatGPT to work with all the risks that it has. Where's the balance between taking that step back, understanding the journey, understanding maybe the broader technical perspective, and making sure you don't miss the boat as everyone else is already on Gen AI?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the shift in perspective, right? Because it's not about missing the boat. It's actually understanding if you're on a boat or a plane or a car or whatever it is that's transporting you to this next phase, right? What I'm seeing a lot of is leaders really partnering with their technology teams, specifically on the people and talent side. I'm going to pick on somebody that I think, not pick on, but mention somebody that I admire in this space. His name is Arvind Casey. And actually, his role is very unique, right? As a leader, he actually leads the corporate engineering team and the people team and have combined people and systems in his current CPO role at Roblox. I think that is beautiful because his journey has been as a CIO at Palantir, a corp eng leader at large companies like Meta and Google. And what's been really interesting in spending a lot of time with Casey is really understanding that a lot of the systems that he knows he has to build with his teams have to come informed with some very basic fundamentals of the human condition, the humanity, right? And so I think I'm not anti-experimentation. I mean, I have come from nearly half a decade of all we thought about was experimentation, but the discipline of experimentation for us is really getting deep down into what are you trying to disprove, right?
Interesting.
So experimentation, I think what I've seen is people use it as a badge to go do something. It's my VIP badge to get into the club and do my thing at the generative AI club, right? When actually experimentation is about saying, let me get curious real quick around what is this opportunity space? What is my hypothesis? In engineering, you have this thing called the design of experiment, right? I had the opportunity to actually serve a residency within our rapid evaluation lab at the Moonshot Factory at X. And what was really great about that was I worked alongside some of the most amazing radical technologists and scientists that taught me from a people perspective and then a technical perspective that a DOE is what they call it. The design of experiment is just as important as what you're experimenting on. Because by the way, experimentation, you have to go into that not trying to prove it's right, but actually trying to prove it's wrong. And in being delighted and surprised that, oh, we were right about this. And so I think that's the nuance that as leaders, we need to think about in this age of AI is, are we experimenting to get into the space? Or are we truly experimenting to look at the opportunity ahead and to disprove our hypothesis? Right? I think more than ever, leaders need to have a DNA of a scientist, and then they need to have the expertise of a technologist, and then they need to have the mindset of a people leader to be able to marry these things together and actually advance in this space.
I was going to say, it sounds like truly approaching it as a scientist where you want to prove yourself wrong. You want to prove your hypothesis wrong. So you're setting up the experiment really with an objective to try and disprove something. Now, again, that may sound really interesting. It also may sound for a lot of people who look at their calendar tomorrow and say, I have enough to do. That sounds like maybe something you wouldn't do. Is there something in there that you could practically apply no matter what kind of team you have and maybe no matter what kind of workload you have? Obviously, for you guys, you knew this is something you have to make time for, you have to make room for. It was probably in your DNA and in your whole mission to experiment a lot. How do you kind of scale that down to the level that it's, approachable for anyone to apply it?
One fun question.
Really? One fun question?
One fun question. If you realize that there's something you want to either explore, to disprove, or make true, or whatever, I think it's 4 words. What needs to be true for this to do this, right? And so even if you're a busy executive and you're handling a problem or there's some sort of impasse that you just can't get around, if you're implementing a new policy around artificial intelligence and what functions can use that, right, in your organization, if you're a busy leader with back-to-back meetings and everyone's coming at you with a ton of inbound, right, you can ask a very simple yet impactful question around, that is really interesting that we are leaning into this space on the legal side to use generative AI as an example.
Right.
What needs to be true for that to be impactful for our business?
Okay. So then you're challenging people internally to say, I'm not saying you shouldn't try it, but I want you to try it with more purpose. I want you to try it with a crystal clear objective in mind so that we can actually look at that experiment and say, did it work or not? Because obviously endless experimentation sounds really interesting, but it may not lead anywhere. And like you said, it may just create problems faster.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll talk about this, and I've said this many times before, right? We live in a world where the past couple of decades, credit to Simon Sinek, who really simplified this aspect of the why, how, and what. Everyone knows the why, how, and
Yeah.
start with the why, and then what's the how, and then what's the what, and you work backwards from there. I would implore to say that in this day and age, we don't forget who.
Yeah.
Who talks about mindset.
Hmm.
Why talks about your purpose of why you're leaning into this thing. How talks about how are you going to get this thing done. What talks about what it is you're going to deliver. We often miss the who in all of that. And the who in all of that is not about who are you to be doing this thing. It's actually who am I in my own mindset? And I think about this when it comes to the work of access, inclusion, and bias and
Yeah.
diversity perspectives, right? It can help you check your own bias,
Hmm.
right? To say, who am I as I'm leaning into asking this question of what needs to be true? Oh gosh, I'm representing a whole sort of points of views on this that I think I need to put on the table as a perspective to share with everyone else so that we can have a shared language around how we look at the problem. What I see when executives, leaders, teams, even individuals, when they're solving problems, is it's always, it's there's you, there's me, there's the problem.
Yeah.
And this is where you get into like, well, you have a different perspective, I have a different perspective, let's disagree and commit. When actually I would implore us to say, okay, what needs to be true for us to have a shared view on the problem or opportunity space so that it becomes me and you against whatever this thing is. So it doesn't become a three-sided thing, but
Yeah.
it becomes actually a very productive dialogue, not a trialogue where you're just kind of chasing your tail.
And there's also another layer to that, which is, what is even like where are the boundaries between the human employees and the AI employees, right? Or the human team members and the AI team members? There seems to be now a shifting perspective. Like the moment people start experimenting, they also realize that a lot of what we thought we were uniquely good at, AI can actually do, not as the final product, but at least as that first draft or that first kind of idea. And where do I stop and where does the AI start? And especially within the team context. So is the who also shifting? The who in that equation?
Yeah, I love that question. And again, as somebody who just loves, seeing the history of this thing, probably a lot of folks know the movie Hidden Figures. And it talks about the amazing women of color, these Black women that went and really changed the trajectory of the United States going to space. A
Hmm.
lady by the name of Dorothy Vaughan. It's an amazing story here, Don, because what she did was she showed the power of the curiosity, right?
Hmm.
The curiosity that she had. So these big computers were coming to NASA. It was going to eliminate all of the jobs of all of the admins and the computational, mathematics that was happening in that space. And IBM came in with these big things. And you know what she did? Instead of seeing that as that's going to take my job, she got really curious, went to the library, learned the language at which that big computer was trained in, which happened to be Fortran, right?
Yeah.
And she really studied that and then trained her team around the constructs of what that was. Push came to shove, there was a moment where the machine actually malfunctioned, right? Where everyone thought, oh, they're going to take my job, it's going to be bananas. And guess what? She met the opportune moment with her team to say, as the executives were looking around at NASA and IBM, does anyone know how to actually work this thing? She came in, and because she was curious and her team was curious, they invented a new capacity for them to be able to contribute to the impact of that transformation of technology in their workspace to
Hmm.
accelerate that technology. And so I think I share that story because when you think about who, is the who changing, right? I think the mindsets need to change, right?
Yes.
AI is going to be a part of our team. We're hearing this term co pilot. co-pilot
Okay.
this, co-pilot that, co-pilot all the way. There's so many co-pilots. No one's going to be a pilot because everyone's a co-pilot, right? When actually, I tend to be a little bit more first principles point of view on that, which is I actually think about the technology as another perspective to be curious about.
Yes.
No one
Yeah.
is going to replace the human aspect of what we bring to the table, right? Curiosity. There's a reason why we need prompt engineers. They don't know how to be curious. So we got to be
Yeah.
curious and prompt them, right? And so I think in your question, in the spirit of is the who changing, I don't think we're there yet. And I would redefine that as what is the mindset that we have to think about it as a perspective, and how can
Mm.
we live in with our human capability and capacity to be curious enough to then meet the moment when that does happen. I mean, there are, robots creating burgers for us right now, right? There are everyday robots that are cleaning things and moving things. There's autopilot in your car, right? But there's no amount of curiosity that will be replaced by that at this moment in time, I believe.
So the human quality that will always be there and will always be needed is the curiosity. But
Yeah,
that idea of getting more curious about what this could be versus what threat does it pose or what part of my
absolutely.
job is going to take away, that's obviously also important, right? You cannot expect the AI to be a good partner or a good co-pilot if you're not curious about what it can do. Yeah. What are some
Exactly.
applications you're looking at with most interest? Like what are some things that you're seeing that pique your curiosity?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ones that are interesting to me is the application of the voice copilot. Like everyone's into text right now,
Hmm.
right? Oh, I'm going to text this. I'm going to put a bunch of data in something and I'm going to have it realize. And I think there's a lot of power in this. And we've seen this with the Siris and the Alexas and the Cortanas of the world. But I think there's another next stage to that where there is this technology that I'm very excited about where you're using a lot more voice to interact versus being on a screen to interact so you can be more present. I know there's nascent technology right now, like Humane is doing some of that work. I mean, in our iPhones right now, we can do some of that work. I think ChatGPT in the 4.0 version, even in the 3.5 version when it was released, had some of the voice capability. So I think I'm really excited about leaning into that and the data that comes behind the tonality of voice, the regional geographical aspect of people's local dialects.
Yeah.
And how does that become another source of big data to be able to analyze and create insights from and learn from that will advance other pieces? And so I think that is really interesting. I mean, imagine when you're in a meeting and you have something on your whatever, super normal is doing some of these things right now, or, Otter AI, these Fireflies note takers. I'm excited to see how that actually embeds as a general part of something we interact with every day. And then I can sit down at the end of the day and say, hey, how was my day? Not just how was this meeting, right?
Yeah. I don't remember what happened today, but please
Yeah,
tell
can
me.
you tell me what happened? And yeah, I don't know. I think there's a really interesting application of that that's still a little bit nascent. I mean, it's
Yeah.
as you can tell with the technology transformation, like everything's a little bit scattered until people kind of start coalescing on different themes. I'm just really excited to see like what kind of application that looks like in the real world, and how we might test that, right?
And it may also be a lot more human, right? It's not that we don't text with people. I mean, that's obviously a big part of it. But I think why the movie Her spoke to so many people and really let people imagine what would happen is because it's so voice based and voice is so personal and it's so you connect way more with a voice than some command interface.
Yes,
So maybe another level on the Turing test in terms of
absolutely.
voice. What are
Absolutely.
some initiatives that you've rolled out to let people do that guided experimentation, putting
Yeah.
out some hypothesis? How could AI help us? And how did you get people? And maybe again, this may be because you're running very different kinds of teams because you're working in super tech companies and you probably have like the smartest people who do really have that tech background. But
Mhm.
even in those teams, do you still encounter some people who are kind of anti-AI or who don't want to go along with, new AI implementations? How did you manage that?
Of course. I mean, I think there's always a spectrum of that in different teams that you're working on, right? The fear and creativity continuum when it comes to generative AI is really
Hmm.
interesting. interesting, right? And again, AI has been around in the form of machine learning. Like I just said, like there's autopilot on your car. That's a form of artificial intelligence to tell you when you need to brake, switch lanes, all of that good stuff, right? And so I think in teams, like what I've seen is, applying this very practically to hiring, applying this very practically to performance management, for example, right? A hypothesis that my team and I had previously was, could we actually, like, what needs to be true for us to up the candidate experience and hiring manager experience, yet shorten the time for us to be able to have more meaningful in-depth conversations. That was kind of like the design of experiment. Like that needed to all be met. Candidate experience, employee experience, shortened time so that capacity of time could bleed into more deeper questions so that you can actually have a way to look at the quality of the hire versus just kind of the bullet point things on their resume on things that they've done, right? And I think that can apply to any organization. And so, one of the experiments that we did run was, we took a regular intake meeting for hiring. And, we noted all of the different pieces. We took then the requirements for the level of the role. And then we took the job description and we took all of that information and we put it into Gemini and asked Gemini, which is Google's AI, to architect for us a series of questions that could help us check for these values, which we had in the organization. So again, it was very and we ran an A/B test on this, right? To say, okay, so how, first of all, manager, candidate, piece, it was really interesting because the information came back, the questions came back. We then took the hiring managers and the recruiters and we said, okay, let's now work at this and prioritize which skill sets, right? Because this is what everybody wanted everything. And therefore, if you want everything, you get nothing, right? We know this in hiring. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might just get what you need. I think that's a Rolling Stones quote or song. So what was really interesting there is that we were actually able to align. We didn't set out to align the hiring team. We knew that was an assumption we wanted to get to an outcome. But because of doing it in this way, the outcome became that we came up with 3 very prioritized skill sets and expertise that we needed. We then decided and voted on that as a team. And the hiring manager intake and calibration meeting became much more in depth because we had a shared language that we all co-created based on what we thought was important in the role. And we weren't, WYSIWYGing the candidates on, oh, we changed this and we changed that and we changed this. And we really went after some of the very key things. The other role where we had, it took much longer and we had to go through a 3rd and 4th set of candidates because the job description and priorities kept changing, right? So that's like a very practical, very interesting A/B test of implementing something very basic of ingredients you already have in the kitchen, your job description, the transcript of your intake meeting, your leveling guide, put that in, spit some interview questions and top skills, go and see if you can vote on that as an interview team, run that test and sprint. We were able to hire this other candidate. I think it only took us 20 days, where previously it would take you 3 months or more because things are
exactly. Yeah.
So that's a very practical piece that we did on the talent side. Very proud of the team that did that. I love that. Yeah.
That's great. I'm sure you did other experiments after, but what are some lessons and why do you think it was so successful in the way that you set it up?
I think we were still also learning. I wouldn't say we claimed it as success because there was still there's still a lot of automation, right?
Too humble.
I think that's a lesson. Like if you can impart one thing on this is I think the mindset, going back to the who, you really have to cultivate a culture of super learning in your team. As leaders, especially with, embedding technologies and transforming to digital or whatever it is, whatever phase you're in adopting technology, I think the lesson here is that always be curious. ABC. Always be curious. Oh, interesting. Why? Why did it do that? How did we get to a point where we actually, we within our team, we were asking questions. We were delighted and surprised, but then we were like, oh, could we make that faster? Yeah. Oh, but then if we make it faster, is that actually good or is that bad? Right. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to wax wane on this, because sometimes as startups, you just got to get stuff done. Like, I don't have time to debate this. Got to get it done together, move forward. Absolutely get that. But it takes you maybe 30 to 45 seconds just to reset. So you're not on autopilot, right? To say, oh, interesting, that went a lot faster. Was that actually good or bad? And how do we know?
Yeah.
How do we know?
And having that dialogue around it. So it sounds like you set them up, you created the experiment, you did the design of experiment, people go into it, then you can reflect on it, you can analyze. Most of that doesn't happen when people say, oh, just go and experiment. So I think you've really given people in this episode a very practical guide to, but what does good experimentation look like? So I think that's super helpful. And I know that we're almost out of time. So I guess like one other final thing that you would say, if there's one thing that leaders, and again, we have listeners who have never done anything with AI and know that maybe they're even falling behind a little bit on their own colleagues and employees, what is something that anyone can do tomorrow to, again, get themselves and their teams and their companies more AI savvy?
Yeah, I think understanding the context of how it has evolved, generally, the journey, and understanding how it has evolved in your organization. Get curious. And then also another C, have the courage to ask the questions without blame or judgment on yourself, on your function, on your leaders, on your organization. Everyone's trying to figure this out. No one has the silver bullet around this. And I think the more curious we can get, the more super learning skills that we embed and encourage in organizations, in our teams, the better we're going to be to have a collective way in which this is applied. It sounds like a very, very basic first principles kind of thing. And I would just implore us in this age where we have so much more noise than the actual signal we need, you need to pay attention or be the person on the team or encourage the person on the team to play the role to ask the reset question, right? What are we optimizing for and what needs to be true? Let's understand the context.
That's fantastic. Because I do truly think there are so many people out there who are trying, maybe some imposter syndrome or some, I'm more senior, therefore I should know it. I think you just told it to everyone. We're all learning this at the same time. No one actually knows what this thing even is. We don't know what it will look like 6 months from today. So keep asking the questions, have that courage to ask and to be open and vulnerable about where you are, and then experiment together in this way. I love it. Thank you so much, AJ, for being on.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you for joining me today as we heard about revolutionizing AI adoption in business from AJ Thomas. Here are the key actionable takeaways from this conversation. Number 1, even in AI, the human is crucial. As AJ said, the human needs to stay in the loop. The advent of AI doesn't mean that we blindly automate, that we set and forget, but that we think about processes where humans and AI can seamlessly work together. It is also important to understand that AI is not a machine where you put in an amazing prompt and then blindly ship the outcome. You need to critically examine and validate AI's work. Train your teams on AI as a coworker, not as a tool that automates their work, and get them at ease with sound judgment. Number 2, understand the history to know the future. According to AJ, generative AI is the 5th industrial revolution. It's the current endpoint of a journey of zeros and ones that started with big data, analytics, insights, machine learning, and NLP. As leaders, we need to understand this evolution so that we know where we are in our experimentation, in selecting our systems, and in writing our policies. Without this understanding, you may just create problems faster than that you're driving adoption. If you haven't caught up, dive a bit deeper into the history of what got us to generative AI so that you can have a more informed opinion about what's next. And it's not just a broad theory. You need to understand your organization's data and AI journey. Therefore, partnering with your technology teams is crucial, especially on the people and talent side. And number 3, experiment, but in a disciplined way. True experimentation with AI goes beyond service level engagement. AJ recommends following the design of experiment approach that engineering teams practice. Implement a structured experimentation process that includes defining clear hypotheses, designing experiments, and critically evaluating results to drive meaningful AI adoption. And this doesn't have to be a big time-consuming project. Any team member can ask AJ's one fun question. What needs to be true for this to be impactful for our business? Her example of letting AI analyze existing job descriptions and interview transcripts to find the best candidate is a great example. Conduct thorough assessments of your business needs and potential outcomes before implementing AI solutions, ensuring that there's alignment with your goals. And finally, curiosity is the most important skill. Yes, we've heard it from AJ. The lesson here is to always be curious. ABC. As machines can already do everything from baking burgers to generating images, our unique role will be to be curious about what else could be. Continuous curiosity and learning are essential for successful AI integration. Implement regular curiosity sessions or innovation workshops where team members can explore new AI technologies, share insights, and brainstorm potential applications for your organization. And keep asking the question, why did it do that? Can we make this better or faster? Especially because no one has figured out AI yet, this can completely set you apart, and it's something you can start with tomorrow. If you like this episode with AJ, please subscribe and give this podcast 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And join me again next week when I interview Helen Lee Cupp and Nicole Sterling, the founders of Women Defining AI. To be the first one to get updates on new episodes, subscribe at flexos.work/AI.